Right. From the moment you push print, there could be a rough somewhere that we found something new that changes the priority. And I think all the board members here are pretty senior board members. You've been here long enough to know that. But I just wanted to do that as a lead off, and then I'll hand over to, on the next slide would be Tom.
Next slide.
So, that's still you.
Oh, that's still me. Okay, so today we showed you this slide last time, only everything. We did about 15 minutes to cover this slide at 50,000 feet. Today's brief really is focused on that master planning phase and what capital plans does to come up with prioritized projects. Now I'll be followed by Mr. Benesef.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the first immediate needs when we're talking about prioritizing projects. Protection of staff and students, protection of the building and emergencies. Now, protection of staff and students is often called life and safety. You can hear it called that. And that includes things like fire alarms, air quality, intercom, secure vestibules, camera systems. These are all immediate needs that affect the life and safety of our students and staff. Now, these are all interconnected, like, so if we're talking about protection of the building, that includes the planned roofs. Or if we get a leak in a roof can cause water pooling in areas, cause added humidity into the building, we can get mold, and now it's a life safety issue. So they're all kind of interconnected. One of the biggest pushes and initiatives that we've done over the past several years is our secure vestibule initiative. And I'm very happy to report that we are almost done with the elementary schools, just a few more on those. And then we can start looking at how we're going to make our secondary schools safer with that secure vestibule concept. Also, areas of air quality, fire alarms. We've done a couple of sprinkler projects. A good example of the difference between a life safety project and the protection of a building is fire alarms versus sprinkler systems. One's protecting the building, one's protecting the students and staff. But then we also have emergencies, things that pop up. I don't know if you remember the landslide at Northwood. That was an emergency. The Bayshore structural issues that we found, in addition to improving structural resiliency, we had to address those issues. And then sometimes there's some opportunity costs, which Larry will talk about later. Ways we can, if we're having issues with the boiler, we just got done retubing boiler west. So these are all areas that immediately have to be addressed, whether they're emergency, they're protection of life and limb, or protecting that building. So I'm going to be followed by Larry, who will talk more about prioritizing the projects and give some more examples.
Hello, this is kind of talking about some emergent needs and how it's kind of changed over the last couple of years. We've all been involved, and this is dealing with roofs. We had an initial priority based on we actually have meetings with maintenance and other people to discuss roofs. And then we have some emergent needs. Spring Hill has developed some leaks. Central, we also have a roof and a few structural issues there. Chugiak, in fact, we talked about this a few board meetings ago in approving the design for it, and also had discussed moving it forward a year to get it done, because we've got $3.5 to $4 million worth of structural upgrades that we should do. So, and now we come to our new priority list, and this kind of gets changed. We see structural upgrades. Again, we see failing systems. We've had some roofs that have done well and some roofs that have not done well. And when we get leaky roofs, we can affect the facility itself. We can also affect how education is delivered. Having leaky roofs and buckets in classrooms kind of takes away from education. So
Larry, as we look at this chart on the left by initial priority, you mean that's the status quo, but you're asking the board to change and evolve as you go to the right?
the one on the left was how we initially had ranked roofs.
Okay.
And then the emergent needs, like I said, we just had brought by maintenance. We've had some really serious leaks in Spring Hill now. So that's being moved up. Central Middle School, it's a school that's been having leaks, but we also have the roof joists are undersized compared to code right now. So in doing it, we will need to take the roof off, replace some roof structure, and then put new roof back down. It's not an emergency type thing, but as we're doing it, we want to bring it up to code.
So this is a good example of those things you see under the initial priority. Those are what you saw in the CIP like last year.
Yeah.
On our newest CIP, it's evolving to show us different priorities. So you're going to see these new priorities on our newer CIP.
Spring Hill, Chugiak, like we discussed a few board meetings ago, Central is now new up here. And Chinook, Campbell, and College Gate have actually been funded by the board, which I wanted to bring up. We brought these forward to you, and we discussed the Chudiak High School, moving it forward a year in the CIP list. I think it was about 3 or 4 board meetings ago, was prior to the summer. And then now Spring Hill, we're going to be starting to look at doing something there. But the other ones, we've brought these to you, and they've kind of been emergent, and the board has been very supportive of getting us the funding we need to get these done.
This slide was really kind of developed to show that behind the scenes, you guys may never see this master spreadsheet they have of all of the roofs in the district, the number of work orders, the severity, whether they're damaging the building. And then they come up with their first cut. Then you bring in Andrew for maintenance, the supervisor, and he comes in with his perspective of the roofs. And it really is an awful lot of people that go into determining what's the number one, but then all of a sudden you do an engineer inspection at Central and find out that, okay, now there's a new thing that's got to be moved up.
So I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this precisely. My first question is, how many of these elementary schools were our standard designs? You know, we had 4 basic designs, right? You've got over in your shop that we bought, we owned, and we were building schools. Those, any of those from
The
the
1990s.
Yeah,
Of the initial list,
No.
none of those are the 90s prototypical. Spring Hill is the 80s prototypical
okay.
that was done prior to that. And we have
that
had a
leads-
few problems with that.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. My perception is that we've established there's some issues with some of those prototypical designs that we own. I'm curious to understand that better and how I know we're not building a lot of new schools these days, yeah, but I still would like to understand what the issue was with the original designs.
Yeah.
Because I liked them, because the ones we were building in the 90s, at least, they had some slope to them. They just weren't flat roofs.
But there was
Yeah.
the slope part that has caused us some problems. In fact, we're right now at Cassoon and Kincaid. We're in design to go out to bid, hopefully within the next month or two, to make repairs on those 2 schools. We've actually, where the slope has come down to that gutter area, that's where we've been getting some ice dam buildups, and it's been backing up under the shingles and therefore causing some leakage on those perimeter classroom areas.
Is that due to the overhang design?
There's a lot of different issues. It's also, we have a warm deck where using shingles, you should have a cold deck.
Yeah.
We
And so that's
could do
where-
a deep dive briefing on roofs because there's lots of different problems unique to different designs
Mhm.
in one of the later on meetings.
Because every year we're doing roofs.
Oh, yeah.
This is.
Yeah, we have over 90 roofs, and if they go 30 years, we gotta do
And I
approximately
understand
3
that.
a year.
My focus was, I really wanted to understand if there was some sort of design issues that we.
There are, and you'll see it, when we do the deep dive, you'll see that there's roofs where the sheet metal screws and the aluminum are creating electromagnetic problems and they're cracking and spreading out and leaking that way. There's multiple different designs that have their own unique problems. I think that's better on a deep dive.
Let's flag,
Okay,
I flag this, we can follow up with that, thank you for the question and information, but I do want to be respectful of the presentation and the agenda as a whole.
Can we go to the next one? Here, when we're looking at projects, we try to come up with some cost savings and also some opportunity cost analysis. Some of that developing cost savings, of course, when we have parts, pieces, systems that are going bad, and we have to spend a lot of time with maintenance, going there repeatedly to repair, that costs a lot of money and especially when we don't have people to do the work. It gets to be really expensive. The other is energy savings. When we're doing a roof, we also look at, that's also the time to put new insulation in to help reduce energy costs. And therefore, we'll do a cost benefit analysis. What is the right amount of insulation to where the payback doesn't get too far out? So, and then there's also, if we're got a project like this, and we'll go back to the roofs, do we combine it with, again, any structural repairs that need to be done, because that's the best time to do it, or any new insulation to be done? Or if that's all good and we have a membrane roof, do we do a restoration, which actually saves approximately 60% versus a full tear off and rebuild? So those are the things that we take a look at, where we can combine things and get better bang for us and reduce overall costs versus doing a lot of separate projects.
So these restorations, they're a pretty new thing, right? I mean, over the last
Yeah.
2-3
5
years.
years.
Right?
Yeah, approximately.
Are we utilizing that? What percentage are we doing restorations where we used to do full redos?
We look,
Go ahead.
yeah, we look at that when we have a roof that's eligible to be restored and we have the insulation under it. And then in the case of another one where we don't have any structural issues, it's kind of tough to do structural if we're doing.
Okay.
So
So it's
part
not
of,
always appropriate because you want to get other stuff accomplished.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have to have an EPDM type roof to do that. And we're trying to replace the old Irma type roofs with EPDM roofs, so we do have that option to do a restoration. But we gotta get rid of the old EP.
You know, thanks for
Irma roofs.
explaining that, because I wouldn't have thought of that myself, so thank you. Yeah.
Should I move to the next slide?
And from here on, we'll go to Dana Menendez.
Do you want the next slide?
Yes, please. So other factors that come in are facility conditions. And we get this all compiled into what we call the Facility Condition Index. You've also heard it called the FCI. And the FCI is a general factor for how much it costs to replace a system with like for like, divided by the sum of all those costs for the entire building, and it gives you a factor. And the higher the factor, the more systems are either in poor condition, past their life expectancy, or becoming close to their life expectancy.
So the higher the FCI, the greater the
Then,
need and urgency.
yes,
And if you remember the first brief, Dana built a slide that showed like roofs are this many years from the time it was brand new until they have to be replaced, and boilers, HVAC, all of those. So they're always looking at all of these different systems and when they're going to age out, looking for an opportunity where it makes sense to combine them into one big project, so you don't have a school continually under construction.
I have a question, just to remind me and anybody else, we can find the FCI for all of the district
CIP.
spaces in the CIP,
In the
like
CIP.
within the CIP. Although they still need not to it.
Yeah.
and it's broken out into a couple of different year ranges.
Ah,
We have a 2-year range, a 4-year range, and a 6-year range. So that just looks out 2, 4, and 6 years from the date that it's run.
Okay, so something might be really urgent within 2 years, but another school might have more of a 6-year
Correct.
red flag.
One thing to note on that too, the FCI can change very quickly because a lot of the systems were put in at the same time. And if it, it's on a computer system, it's got a bunch of dates on it. So when it hits that date and all those systems were put in at the same time, it's gonna change very rapidly. That's why we do the 2, 4, and 6.
Great. Next slide?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's one question. I remember what happened at West High School with communications and breakdown and the equipment just, you can't buy it anymore. And I remember the same situation was at food service about 15 years ago. It was in the point of collapse and without being able to buy replacement parts. Where are we at as far as the components there, because we're outdating things quicker now. Where is the weakest link right now that people are most afraid of? I mean, overhead systems, we've got a lot of them that are older ones, but I guess we salvage stuff maybe from what was in West High School, maybe with some parts. But what's our weakest link, or what's upcoming from a technology standpoint that's gonna drive us up the wall?
And
intercoms?
It's been
Intercoms.
intercoms.
Communications being one, I guess.
Right. Yeah, we've got right now working on, anytime we're doing like the SU projects and stuff, where we have an older intercom system, we're including to replace that intercom with our new standard. And so we're including it. It's a lot more cost effective because the intercom originates from that office area. So while we're remodeling it, let's just replace that intercom now.
Okay.
So we've started doing that now with designs. And whenever we can, we will take on something like that. Because intercoms are getting old and we've got some that are really old.
And that's why I asked that question. 'Cause
I want to be cognizant of time, so let's, if it's okay with everyone, let's move to the next slide.
Yes. So in our educational improvements, we also have the Educational Adequacy Index, our EAI. You guys are probably familiar with that. It works very similar to the FCI. It's made up of missing spaces. So if we look at the current inlet view, according to our district-wide ed specs, it needs to have a gym and an NPR, but they only have one space, which is the NPR. So they're missing a major second space. So that gets contributed to our Educational Adequacy Index. And that works just like the FCI. The higher the number, the more need it has for educational adequacy. And it's based on either our district-wide educational specifications or the building itself educational specifications that have been approved by the board.
And this, the educational adequacy is also within the CIP. Is that correct? To my memory is correct, okay? So you can look at all the numbers, great.
And it really serves, we start with the FCI, we rank them by FCI. And then we look at the EIC or ECI, we rank them by that. And that gives us an objective approach to evaluate the projects. Of course, you evaluate it in its totality, but it gives us that starting point.
A good example is Wonder Park, where it was built open concept many years ago, but the ed specs for today's classrooms now, it doesn't fit. And that's why it was, for a lot of reasons, one of the recommended closure schools, because it's that, or do we rebuild it to be able to provide the educational spaces that are now the standard for the district? And you'll see that also in the FCI or in the capacity utilization brief in the next couple of weeks. I think we're at the next work session. And you'll see how ASDs, really their utilization really is by type of classroom and how many kids can fit in a classroom by type of requirement. And all of that is rolled into education adequacy.
Okay. And we're back to me again. This is kind of laying out how a project is developed. Now that we've gone through all these things of educational adequacy, facility condition index, taking a look of our emergent needs, now we're ready to actually start a project. First, we establish the project parameters. What are we planning on doing? And then we go and look at, are there any other projects or anything else that we could combine or do something else? We talk to maintenance, we actually go and talk to principals and teachers and see, is there something else that we could be doing that fits within the scope? And then we develop new project parameters. Then, of course, we review the facility capacity and see if it's meeting what we need. So all of these things come together. Then we do our first level of design, which includes the schematic design, and it includes a cost estimate. And then after we get there, we develop some cost benefit analysis, which I was going to bring up the Birchwood Boiler project. We actually put 4 items out there to have the engineer do some cost benefit analysis. And 3 of them came out with a payback over 50 years. And so those items were eliminated from the project. Ended up saving about $800,000 worth of work that just never had payback. So we actually do look at these things. And then we, with all of this, we look and develop new parameters based on these results. Then we iterate and go back again and do it for the construction documents and the final bid documents. And so it's not, we need to do this, therefore we put it out to bid. We actually go through a process that makes sure it makes sense and it's cost effective and it gives us what we need.
So I think it's also important to note in that cost benefit analysis, that includes a life cycle cost analysis. So we're evaluating a renewal versus a replacement versus a building life extension. And, this is put out to the designers, and in their reports, their project assessment reports, they provide, what would it cost just to do a building life extension? What would it cost to do a renewal on it? What would it cost to replace the building? So we're looking at it over time. We're looking at the last 20 years of unfunded needs, and we're looking ahead to the next 20 years on unfunded needs. Abbott Loop is a perfect example. We were looking at close to $68 million of work that would be needed to put into that school.
This is just my reflection hearing this. So I know that during my first year on the board, I spent a lot of time trying to understand the facility, the FCI and the EAI, in talking about that particular bond to community councils. I think storytelling, what you all are sharing here is both really, really specific and kind of nerdy, and yet really important to building trust and understanding. And so I think as we move forward in future bond cycles, if there's a way that we can translate this really important work into information that's easily accessed to members of the community to build, oh, wow, you're making decisions, you ruled out 3 of those that would have not paid for themselves over 50 years. I mean, I feel like that's an important piece of maybe the communications work, but there's value in what you guys are sharing here. And I would love for it to be beyond the rim. I saw, I'll go with Member Donnelly and then Corey.
Thank you. So a question I get asked that really relates to what Member Lessons just brought up is, okay, so $68 million to fix up Abbott Loop, but we moved the Native Cultural Charter School in there, and they're happy to be there. And so people then say, well, why was it okay for them, but not okay to stay as a regular school?
We have a
And the same-
5-year.
sort of the same thing happened with Aquarian too. People
Well,
ask about
The
that.
fire department signed, or the fire marshal, Brian, signed a 5-year extension because we had run out of the previous one where you had to put a fire suppression system in it. But at the end of
But
5 years,
but they're
it's
in
got
there.
to be demolished,
But-
or we have to build a new school.
But that didn't really address my question. My question is, why is it okay for the Native Cultural Charter School to be in there now, but not a regular school?
So Abbott Loop didn't have a fire suppression system. You couldn't put a fire suppression
I actually
system in
got the
without
money.
raising the
I
roof.
remember I got the funding to put
So
it.
you had to raise the
Yeah.
roof and take that off to be able to raise it high enough, because Abbott Loop was built for normal height people like me to walk the hall.
It was a 7 foot, yeah. it was a
And so
7 foot
there-
roof. So, but I thought we had estimates for not raising the roof and doing the fire suppression, but that's missing, we're missing the forest for the trees here.
Can we follow up?
It's much more of a, as we sell these things to the
Right.
public, how do we answer that question? Because the existence, it's gonna have to be there for whoever's in there, for the fire marshal to approve it. So that's not the element we need an explanation.
Okay, I saw Corey Aist, Member Higgins, and President Bellamy. And then let's keep moving forward.
I have a question. So in terms of the bidding, so we get a bid and we go with the contractor, but there's lots of times we save money. Totally love that. But there's also times when they go way over budget, like it's happening, I guess, I don't know, at the gym at East or something. But how does that facilitate it? So there's cost overruns. How's that part of the bidding process? And how do you accommodate that?
Just at East is an earthquake project was,
Yeah, and the gym at East is done.
I
We
don't-
did that
yeah,
3
that
summers
was,
ago.
The
yeah,
document showed that it was 97% over over budget.
That's, yeah, no,
That's not true.
no,
No.
I don't know what you're looking at, but.
When we
that's-
put a project budget together, it includes contingencies for hidden conditions, things that unknowns, open a wall, and oh my God. Those happen at times. Or we find something that is requested that we need to do. And that's where we work with our contingency.
And we're gonna do a deep dive into construction
Okay.
as well.
Great,
And, yeah,
okay.
our normal is 10%. And we usually.
This is part one of a five-part series.
We have multiple.
Okay. Okay.
That one slide that showed, we're only talking about
Yeah,
the
this is
first of
only
all those
planning.
things. This is
Okay.
just planning.
Member Higgins, I
Very
think was
short.
next.
I just want to go on record here. I do not think Abbott Loop doesn't have a fire suppression system. They changed the code with the state, with the city, with the building code. And as a result, they need to make changes to come up to code. If it was somebody's house, only when you sell the house, you gotta come up to code. With a school, you have to do it when the code changes. So the code changed on that. There is a fire suppression system there.
There's
Yeah,
there's an
they overcast.
enhanced fire detection system, but there's no fire
The sprinkler
suppression
system
system.
does not work.
They
Doesn't
no,
exist.
It doesn't
There is a-
exist.
Never
But they
has.
had the overhead,
It's
you could
never-
see the things
No.
up there.
No, that's just water.
They don't have any fire suppression.
But they have a top of the line.
They're
detector.
safe, you can get the kids out, the structure's gonna burn down. It's safe enough to have people in there because the enhanced fire suppression or the fire detection system is the best one in the district. But that building isn't gonna, there's gonna be nothing to put it out if a fire starts. There is enough time to get everyone out though.
Wow, I was unaware.
Fire hydrant.
Okay, member President Melny.
So I don't want to belabor the conversation.
Yep.
With Abbott Loop, we already know that the building was insufficient for long-term use. The fire marshal had the authority to extend it to waive for 5 years. The students at Abbott Loop deserved, in my opinion, a opportunity to have more academic opportunities. It was not just access to a building. It involved access to activities, academic resources that were not available to them in a very small school. So that compared with the amount of money we would be pouring in there to keep kids there, so having a 5-year lifespan on it waived by the fire marshal is absolutely okay with me. And I think this is back to your storytelling. If we can help tell people exactly why we moved Abbott Loop, it wasn't to save money. I mean, in the long term, we probably would have put more money in there than we would have warranted. But the academic opportunities available to students is why I voted for it. And that's my conversation that I have with the community when I have the
And that's
opportunity.
part of what will be future conversations
Absolutely.
about the district's footprint. I want to be really cognizant of time because we will have communications at the hour. Focusing on planning right now.
Me.
Yeah.
again. Actually, all of you are front and center on one that is happening right now for master planning at Bartlett High School. The old original master plan was completed in 1999. There's been a few changes since then. And so we have restarted it because it's coming up on our CIP to do some major renovations. So we're redoing the master plan. And right now you're on that very bottom where facility condition survey has been completed and is in review, and we're taking a look at it and we're sending back our comments. We have also, right now, we have Amy Yurko with Brain Spaces, who does educational conditions and ed specs. They have performed some interviews, talked to staff, administration, and starting to see how that school fits for education today. What's coming up next is any plan changes in education delivery, and I know you've all been involved with the CCL right now, and how is that going to affect what a school looks like and how it operates? And everything about the school, because that's what the school's for, is education. And so while we're doing this and we're setting up for a renovation, let's set it up to match what's coming down the pike. And we want to make sure it's in. And then after all that's done, we will put together a plan, which will also include some phasing. The original plan had a school that was completely full, and we were looking at massive amounts of relocatable classrooms to move kids in and out of. Well, we're at just in the low 70% capacity right now, and maybe we can do something different where we can keep students more in the school and just move around school doing these renovations. So, but these will be here for you to look at and approve. We're looking at possibly April or May. So, and we are involving, besides the staff, students with surveys, we're also going to be inviting public involved to that.
Quick clarification. So in April or May, the board will see a plan specific to Bartlett High School or to all of our high schools?
Just
Or-
Bartlett.
Just Bartlett. Okay.
Yes.
And we're done.
With our middle schools and high schools, what's your current philosophy or recommendation on how to balance the interest of having multiple points of egress and ingress versus security?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And again, we will follow whatever is established by the administration, including our safety and emergency preparedness people. And elementary, which we're doing right now, is during the day, there's one point of entrance for the public. In middle schools, I know we're starting to look at doing some of the buzz-in systems where, again, after hours, that's in. High school, again, we'll follow the lead of what the board and administration puts together of how you want this to operate. And we'll just make it
Dave,
work.
I've kind of got lead with Ashley and Sven, and we're working through high school and middle school in terms of how they operate. And we haven't come to closure yet. We need a lot of input from principals. But over the next few months, I think the board will see that we put a significant amount of effort into security this year in terms of training every single GL meeting with principals for security, and sidebar conversations in other groups. So I think you're going to see that it will take several months, but we will be in a much better posture than we have been in the past when we get all this locked in.
I've got about 15 minutes left for our meeting and there are a few other items. So let's,
I just have one
there's so
closure
much
slide
more
and I
to do.
will take less than a minute.
Perfect.
Okay, we know that last year, we recommended 6 school closures. By the way, the public, by and large, overwhelmingly, over 50% in every single survey supported closing and consolidating schools. But at every school site we went to, they overwhelmingly didn't want to close that school. So what we're doing this year is we're gonna have surveys going from October through January, going out and doing multiple surveys about how do you feel about should a Title I school ever be closed, an immersion school, a special school, and the different metrics that help us build a rubric to be able to have a more public, visible assessment of the schools. That next fall, we will probably come back with a multi-year plan for school closures and consolidations. And at the end of January through April timeframe, we'll start scheduling some town halls to revalidate the information we got from the surveys and get feedback from the public. And then by May, we'll present it to the board to approve the evaluation rubric. So we can, in the summer, go through and evaluate all the schools, come up with a multi-year plan, and present that to the board next fall. So,
Thank you. I think that's a really excellent lay of the land and forecasting a long and really important conversation. So I appreciate seeing that and hearing that.
Good. And we can go to Andy.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, or
Yes, let's look at the disparity test, and how this really relates to the amount that we can collect with our additional local contribution and the max local contribution from the city.
Yeah, you can vote.
And at the joint school board meeting with the assembly, that was an agenda item. I'm gonna try to get some visuals to help us better understand. This is a pretty complex topic. But really what this is saying is the state is gonna limit the amount of local contributions we can accept up to the max calculation. Previously, they had allowed us to exclude local taxes that we had received for transportation and preschool. Now they're adding that into the local cap instead of being outside the cap.
Is that by a change in deed regulation or something?
We just got a letter for deed guidance that says, here's how they're gonna implement the statement. And it goes back to the letter they sent to Juneau a few months ago saying they were over the cap. But they're gonna waive it for the previous years, and going forward, they need to not contribute additional money for transportation.
So this is just a new interpretation of an existing regulation or statute?
I don't know if there's existing regulations or statutes out there, it's just an interpretation of, and it really has to do with the disparity test, where they're allowed to deduct federal impact aid from our foundation funding, and how they calculate that. The rub, though, is the feds have specifically allowed the deed not to include transportation funding in that disparity test calculation. So even though deeds, or the feds have said you don't have to include it, deed is saying you do, as far as the max local.
Well, I'm just saying, I think we've got real high ground for a logical argument that there's a clear distinction between a major urban area and a small area when it comes to transportation expenses.
Right, and that's why the federal government disallowed, or doesn't take that into consideration. So I think we're all on the same page on there, but the state has said, we're not gonna allow you to exceed your local contribution, or the amount you put into transportation and other programs like preschool or something wouldn't be considered as part of that local cap instead of outside of that local cap.
Do you have a sense whether this is education board driven or by the staff of the department?
I don't know, it came from the finance manager.
So, point of question, so there was a letter that ASD received from Deed,
Different from
Yes.
Juneau's.
different from Juneau's.
All superintendents receive.
Right,
Okay,
anything-
but we each, every district in the state received
Municipal
a
districts
similar,
that can,
every municipal district.
right, if they're an REA, they don't collect the local taxes anyway, so it wouldn't apply.
Well, with the combination of preschool and transportation, how many millions of dollars have we talked about?
For 24, we budgeted about $5 million for transportation, and I want to say $1.5 million or so for pre-K from municipal funds. And then, as they get further into that, and the alcohol tax and the marijuana taxes are all going to be included in that as well. So whatever they contribute, those programs may in the future be limited. The one thing for FY '24 is we developed our budget prior to receiving, well, prior to the guidance, but also prior to receiving the one-time funding from the state, which goes into that maximum allowable local contribution. So that is going to go up by nearly 6 million because of the one-time funding. However, so we may end up having to give some money back to the city if the transportation and preschool exceeds what we have, what our maximum is. It's not going to be a large percentage of our overall budget, so I wouldn't expect it to be a huge hardship. However, it could be that we aren't able to accept all the money the city would like to give
And there's
us.
no waiver process?
There's always a possibility. We have a new commissioner.
Okay.
Who's now on board,
This one.
and there's
Always,
always,
okay. Thank you.
So just to come back to this, it sounds like you will be briefing
Yes.
the board and the assembly on this
Right,
a
that's
bit
something,
more
yeah.
next week.
And I'll try to have some visuals that show out the calculations too, and get that understanding a little more. But that also kind of, it rolls into our enrollment update, which right now we're a little over 500 students below where we were this time last year. And then, or we're actually projecting a few hundred more than what we had had for last year. So as those students goes down and our adjusted ADM goes down with it, that's the basis of the calculation for the additional local effort. So that might present a little more of a problem depending on what that actual adjustment is.
Let me get this, the net gap, the real gap is about 700.
Students?
We were projecting a 200 increase, we're at a 500 decrease right now, so the gap. is
Yeah, I
about
mean, it's really hard to tell because students continue to come in throughout September into the
And
student
the
count period. in
intensive needs
October.
numbers are pretty strong.
Right, so as those go up, we might need more support for intensive needs, but that will raise the adjusted ADM and our local cap along with it. So we don't really know exactly where we're gonna end up. I mean, it could be a few million, several $1 million that we're gonna get less than what we planned.
Now we're up to 8. Now we're up to 8. The gap just grew by 8 million.
So we'll come, as soon as when we know more about the enrollment, we'll get a better idea of how much the funding decrease will be, and that will affect the maximum local contribution.
Would the administration next week at the joint meeting have any recommendations for one or both bodies to move forward with requesting a waiver, requesting a challenge? I mean,
I think we'll
will
need
there
to
be
see what this.
proactive recommendations?
Right, we'll need to know what the scope of it is and see how much we're actually we could potentially have to reduce because of this change in interpretation. So I think we'll be,
So it'll be probably more of a disclosure next week as opposed to any action.
right, and then the action could come from either the school board or the district to request a waiver. However, if it's going out to all municipal districts, they'll all be held to the same standard. I don't know if that'll be possible. As you know, there's only like 5 or 6 districts that actually contribute up to the cap that are going to be affected by this. So it's really somewhat targeted at those 5 or 6 districts.
And I think in conversations with the Superintendent's Association, I do want to share that there's kind of mixed views on this because there are quite a few districts that don't receive funding from a municipality at all. So they don't necessarily see this as an issue to them. So there's that layer to this conversation too.
But don't all those districts that don't get a local contribution get the federal funds that makes up about the same thing they would get from local?
They don't
Those
have,
impact, those impact.
they don't all get them, no. It really depends on how much of it is on like federally non-taxable land, like tribal land.
Right.
A lot of them get a lot of money, but most of that's taken away from the districts as they have, as the amount that the feds take away for federal impact aid is based on the proportionate amount of what your required local contribution is versus your total local. So if we have a required local of 100 million, the city gives us 200 million, they take 50% of those impact aid funds, or 90% of 50%, I guess. So it's kind of a longer.
Only 23 of the 54 districts are in taxable boroughs or cities, right? So there are more districts like Capital, they get 100% from the state because they don't have to bond because they have no taxes. And so there's always a disparity between like the rural legislators on the Bush caucus and then the big cities.
Well, the other way around this problem is to attack the current percentage cap, which is completely arbitrary and was a political decision not based on any rationale that I can identify. Is there anything like a white paper we could read that will explain how that cap is justified or non-justified compared to other national standards?
The cap for the 90% of the impact aid they take, or
No, I'm talking about the percentage limit on local contribution.
That's 23% of our basic need, which is the disparity test is actually 25% between the high and low districts. So that's why that's set at 23%. So it ensures we stay within the study.
2.75.
That's the required local contribution, that's 2.65 mils that they take away from our state funding, whereas a rural district doesn't have that taken away. So that's different and not really part of this additional local contribution.
Well, I think that we will be eagerly tuning in and participating in the meeting next week, and I'm sure that the assembly members will be very interested in how this evolves as well. Thank you for that update. I wanted to pivot to item number 4. The heading is ASD fiscal scenarios. pending a possible January veto override, and I think the general question is what could ASD do with a full 1,348 VSA as had been proposed in the legislature?
An additional 25 million of one-time funding, because
Basically.
that's what was in that, what would be
Well-
overridden would be the one-time funding. If they were to provide new, then that would be a different conversation.
Well, I guess
Without
there are
something
many,
going.
many possible choose your own adventure paths that could evolve. But what are some scenarios that the administration sees should Juneau, our legislators reconvene in Juneau, and override the governor's veto would be one scenario, or take action with a BSA decrease in the scale of that 1,348.
Yeah, if they're to override the veto and just give us the additional 25 million or so, the recommendation may just be save that money and try to offset the next year's deficit, which would be unknown at that point because they wouldn't have addressed the BSA issue. If we do get a BSA increase and that's overridden, actually set in statute in January, that would be phenomenal. We could build a balanced budget based on pretty well the current ideas that or standards that we're teaching it now. But it would be, again, up to administration to determine any changes that are necessary as well.
So if the legislature reconvened and by some circumstances were to move forward with a BSA increase, what's the latest date that the administration can prepare an FY25 budget?
Well, they would want to focus on the very first date by state statute where we have to give teachers paperless.
Okay.
So that's, it's about 10 or 12 days before school gets out.
Okay, so
We can get the exact calendar date. It's May 5th.
Okay. Maybe
So it, for tenured, and then it's for last day of school is for the remainder, or the day before, we have to notify AEA. So it's really, the timing is that, and then we all have to, you're making a gamble that the governor's actually gonna sign it
Right.
and not veto again. But really, they need to pass it in both houses and ready to go to a joint committee in April.
Is
That's pretty quick for a legislature.
Is it safe to say that if we were to receive funds, save them, or receive funds and allocate them, that the effect would be to retain teachers by and large, and that would prevent or mitigate the likely significant increase to pupil-to-teacher ratio that an $80 million deficit would otherwise portend?
Oh, it'd certainly help mitigate increase to the PTR. It wouldn't potentially, if it's just in 25 million, it wouldn't completely eliminate it, but would help for sure. And if they could address the BSA, that would be great sooner rather than later, because the underlying problem is, we prepare our budget and have you guys approve it in February, and by that time, all our staff's like, oh, we have, hundreds of fewer jobs, then I'm maybe losing my job. Staff are looking for other opportunities, other districts, and we're gonna lose a lot of really good folks, and there's gonna be a lot of angst among the community. So that's really one of the biggest issues. If they could do it as soon as they get into the legislative session, then we could mitigate some of that. But, even into April before layoffs are having to be issued would also be very nice.
Thank you. All right, it is 1 o'clock. That was a whirlwind of Anchorage School
But you
District.
got through your agenda.
I got through the agenda.
Go, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, from Roofs to Juneau. We can get it